2002. A man wakes up from a coma in an empty, deserted hospital. He wanders outside and finds himself in central London.
Hello?
Only something's wrong. Everything's disturbingly quiet.
Hello?
Until... By the early 21st century, horror cinema was beginning to change, and the zombie movie, something that by the early 90s had run itself into the ground, was about to be resurrected for a whole new generation. Two movies in particular, one British, one Spanish, breathed new life into the subgenre by giving zombies a makeover. They were no longer comically slow, shuffling, brain-dead corpses. These zombies were fast, savage, and absolutely terrifying. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the zombie movie, and we discuss two of the most frightening zombie movies ever made, 28 Days Later and Wreck.
And lastly, meet Mela.
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across several weeks. We are currently in the middle of exploring the evolution of the zombie movie, and this is part 15. In which things are about to get nasty. We are going to be looking at two of my personal favourites and two of the, as the intro suggested, scariest zombie movies ever made. Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later from 2002 and Balaguero and Plaza's Wreck from 2007. Now, we are going to be talking about both these movies in spoilerific detail, and I think part of what makes these films so powerful and so frightening is not knowing what the fuck is about to happen next. So if you haven't seen these movies, I would urge you to go away and watch them before listening to us discuss them, because you will never forget the first time you experience either 28 Days Later or Wreck. Let's get started. Now, later on in this episode, I'm going to be joined by the BFI's Anna Bogutskaya to discuss Wreck. But first of all, we're going to discuss 28 Days Later. And for this discussion, I'm very excited to be joined by a brand new guest. He also works for the BFI. He writes for Sight and Sound, Den of Geek, a whole bunch of other places. He's a very good friend of mine. He is South London's finest. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast, Lou Thomas. Hello, Lou.
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
I am very good. Thanks so much for being here. I'm in your pad right now. We've got a couple of beers. It's nice and chilled. Just what you need for talking about horror movies. So first of all, just for people who don't know anything about you, Lou, tell me a little bit about sort of who you are, what you do.
Right, okay. So, I work for the BFI for my sins.
Yes.
I'm 5 years in. I'm digital production editor. The editor side of it is more, writing and interviewing and stuff like that. Directors and actors mainly, but also
you've interviewed a lot of people the last couple of years, haven't you?
I've done a few, a few sort of small, medium, and big names. I write a bit for Sight and Sound, Little White Lies, Den of Geek, and The Skinny.
Love it. You get around.
Oh, mate, I try to.
Amazing. So obviously, you love film. I just want to know about your relationship with the horror genre as well. I mean, has the horror genre always been something that you've kind of enjoyed and been into?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Horror. So I think about this sort of stuff quite a lot because what else is there to think about other than the Friday night out? My two favourite genres are horror and comedy.
Perfect.
My big thing, if I'm not in a cinema watching a horror film, my absolute favourite way to watch horror is as late as possible at night, in the dark, and ideally alone.
Yes.
And ideally in the scariest, darkest house I've got, with creaking doors and all that. Because I've lived alone a few times in my life, and whether I've whatever my situation has been, but you can't beat like, a midnight. Ideally, you start the film at midnight because
Yeah.
that gives it that extra sort of almost witching hour sort
Yes.
of vibe, But yeah, I love being scared. I just love it.
Me too. Do you still find that you get scared from horror movies? Like, do they still get you?
Completely and utterly. I literally soil myself. Well, no. Well, maybe not literally. Let's maybe remove that word.
While I'm sat on your sofa, I don't want to know that.
Like, oh god, I had a really bad accident, Mike. I'm sorry, man. No, I've never knowingly soiled myself, either in the cinema or watching a horror film. But there's always time. There's always time.
There's always time.
Yeah.
What about the zombie movie? Are you a fan of zombie movies? Because again, there are so many.
Right, I love zombie movies. Now, I've not seen a million and all I've not seen tons and tons and tons.
Well, it's
but
impossible to see them all.
Well, there are so many. It's ridiculous, right? Obviously, you got to go back to Night of the Living Dead, and I mean, you can go back to I Walk with a Zombie and all this business.
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough. But like for me, Night of the Living Dead and Dawn are absolutely mind blowing, and only relatively recently watched both of them again. And even 10 times later, you still see new things in them.
Oh
yeah. But also, and actually, I know I've been talking about like my love of comedy, but Zombieland is like a great. It's brilliant, and I know they're shooting another one at the moment, aren't they? Or they're in pre-production or something like that.
That's right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think again, a very difficult thing to get right is balancing horror and comedy together, and like being able to scare an audience and make them laugh. I think that's what Jordan Peele is brilliant at, right? But yeah, I think there are some zombie movies that do that really well. Shaun of the Dead as well is fantastic.
Yeah, I was going to say Shaun of the Dead is a big favourite of mine, and Zombieland, like I said, and of course, what is interesting about actually not just zombie films but horror as well is that they are inherently like ridiculous and a bit camp anyway because of the subject matter. It's like no matter how hard you look for meaning and how hard you want to pontificate,
yes,
when you're seeing a load of heads get sliced off and you're seeing eyeballs gouged out and that, you can't take it. I mean, it's not, you don't see it in the street, do you? You know what I mean? The thing is with dramas and stuff, like a normal, what hurts emotionally more is seeing like a dinner table argument. That hurts because you can feel it and it's realistic. People love a zombie movie because fundamentally you ain't going to walk down to the bus stop and get eaten at the bus stop by a zombie. It's not going to happen. Like you can say, oh, it might, no. You're not going to get a helicopter cut off someone's skull in front of you and then a zombie's going to come after. It just don't happen like that,
No.
So.
And I think that's exactly it. I think zombie movies are fun because they are escapism. We've talked about this a lot over the last few weeks and months. You get to kind of imagine what you would do in this scenario, and you get to imagine what you would use as a weapon and where you would go and how you might kill a zombie. What would you use around the house to lop its head off or set it on fire or whatever it is you need to do? And I think there's a certain amount of fun and catharsis about zombie movies. However, as much as we've said that over the last several weeks, I think the film we're about to talk about this week is what's different. Because compared to what you just said there about how, it's not likely that you'd see a zombie apocalypse happen outside your house, I think this movie does put it in a place where it's real. I think this is what makes this film so scary, because Alex Garland has said to us, okay, now what if zombies, but real life in London? So I think without further ado, let's get into it. Let's discuss Danny Boyle's 2002 movie, 28 Days Later.
I know who you are. I know what you think you're doing.
You don't want to get hurt. Keep your mouth shut and don't move a fucking muscle.
The chimps are infected. They're highly contagious. They've been given an inhibitor.
Infected with what?
In order to cure, you must first understand.
Infected with what?
Rage.
What the fuck is talking about?
Get the cages open.
No!
Listen, you sick bastard. We're going and we're taking your torture victims with us.
We're gonna get you out of here.
Listen, the animals are contagious. The infection is in their blood and saliva. One bite. Stop! You've no idea!
So, okay, right, the gist is kicks off in Cambridge. I mean, nothing ever really kicks off in Cambridge. If you've ever been there, it's like the least offensive place in the world. You know what I mean? It's the most mum-friendly town you've ever been to. But anyway, I digress. It all kicks off in Cambridge at this research facility with a load of animals, and there's some animal rights activists who go into the research centre. They see all these monkeys and they're like in cages and all this sort of business. So they open the cages, and they're about to open the cages, and then a scientist rocks along, and the scientist, amusingly, is David Schneider.
Yes, it's so weird to see him in a horror movie.
Right. And David Schneider, for any non-British people listening, is like a comedy hero from stuff like The Day to Day, and has written brilliant stuff. I think he even co-wrote The Death of Stalin, which is an amazing film you should definitely watch.
Yeah.
But,
he's done a lot of Alan Partridge and that kind of thing.
He also plays a Eurostar driver in Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible.
Amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
Right. What a career this guy's had. Anyway, so David Schneider rocks in as this scientist, and he's like, no, you can't take the monkeys, you can't do this, they're infected, they're blah, 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 they're full of rage. I'm like, mate, I'll get on the tube every day, I'm full of rage, you know what I mean? Anyway, so this is all happening in Cambridge, and then, of course, the animal rights nutters, they're like, no, what you're doing is bang out of order. They grab Schneider, they get him out of the way, they open the cages, and then, as you'd imagine, this one monkey goes proper sick, jumps out, grabs this woman, you know, it goes proper crazy. That's my sound effect.
That's very good.
Right, it does. It goes completely sick, and then it goes absolutely mental, and then there's a very quick cut, and then it's like 28 days later, and then, whoa, yeah, you know, I love it when there's a title and it makes sense.
It's so good. It does make sense.
You know, it's like that Ronsil thing. It does exactly what it says on the tin, you know what I mean? Anyway, it opens then, after this prologue, with Cillian Murphy is in a hospital. Mm-hmm. The hospital is deserted. And it's supposed to be St Thomas's, which is, for non-Londoners, is just slightly south of Westminster Bridge. There, and it's like, you know, obviously a main London hospital, and he's wandering around. It's actually not. It's not. It's shot in various other ones that aren't important, but anyway, he's wandering around and it's deserted, and and then we get to the real juice. He gets out into the streets, and this is where it goes from being an interesting film to being like, wow, this is going to be really good, because suddenly he's rocking around a deserted, empty London now. As any listener with like a fairly savvy ear will grip, this is my hometown, so, you know...
You're born and bred Londoner?
I am indeed, yeah. We're currently sitting in South London, a place where I was born, and not literally the place I was born. That'd be mental if I was still there. But, like, I'm a Londoner, and to see London on screen and to see it done with any sort of justice is always decent.
Yeah.
And with 28 Days Later, it's incredible because it's desert. The opening scenes are deserted. Absolutely deserted.
Yeah.
And you've got bits of London, so Westminster Bridge, because so he comes out of St Thomas's, he walks over Westminster Bridge, and then he walks past, he walks right up to Piccadilly Circus, where he sees all these notes that are put around near Eros, all these notes from missing people, and have you seen this person, etc., etc., which, funnily enough, Danny Boyle later said, although they were shooting the film before and after 9/11, these scenes in questions were shot slightly before 9/11. He said that later when they were cutting it, it made him think of the notes that people had stuck up in New York after 9/11. There were thousands and thousands of people putting up notes and posters. Have you seen this kid? Have you seen my friend? Whatever. And it was like that sense of, horrific activity, what's gone down.
And just mass loss, I suppose, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he's walking around these deserted streets, and the logic, like most film logic, it's, if you know London, it's not strictly by the book, because he walks... If you're talking real time, because there's bits where he walks from like Piccadilly Circus and then 30 seconds later he's in Bank.
Yes.
Now, anyone who knows London knows that's like 2 or 3 miles away. So you wouldn't actually be able to do that. But of course, with film logic, there are cuts. So you can say, oh, that's half an hour or an hour later or 2 hours later. But even so, you still probably wouldn't do that walk because that would be crazy.
But essentially what he's getting is all of the big, well-known monuments and that kind of thing, right? Isn't it?
Right,
it's the
so
landmarks.
This is the thing he's doing. And what was really interesting, I remember hearing like years and years ago, that and I've read a little bit around it since, but when he was shooting it, they had like 8 or 9 different people with cameras. They even had the producer who had a camera. They all had these mini DV cameras because basically they didn't have the space to shoot like anywhere. They had to do it not exactly on the fly. They got permission from the various councils, Westminster Council and so on, and the City of London and so on. But they were only had I think 45 minutes per bit. So they had 45 minutes and you had to shoot and then that's it. Because obviously London, there's traffic and there's people all the time, 24 hours. And there was talk about like when they were shooting and if you look at the film, you can see it's shot like very early in the morning because that's literally the only time you can do it. And there were times when they were trying to, like, commuters were apparently just just out of shot. Commuters were like, "What are you doing? You're not allowed to do this." And also the funny story and the thing that really sort of struck home with me was that there were people like coming home from raving who'd been clubbing at 6 in the morning and 5 in the morning, who were coming out and like, "Oh mate, what's up? Oh, I don't know," and like had to be like, no, you can't walk through there. We're shooting. You know what I mean? So you
that can imagine, can't you?
Yeah, exactly.
The stress of having to film this.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and it's just like after the chaotic monkey scene,
Yes.
followed by this like, oh, he's confused and he's waking up, which is kind of a staple of horror, especially the zombie genre.
Yes.
You know, and certainly like Resident Evil films all tend to have that kind of vibe.
It's how The Walking Dead starts.
Yeah, well,
you know.
this is the thing. Don't crucify me, but I've never seen an episode of The Walking Dead.
You're not missing much, to be honest.
I've heard so many mixed reviews, but we'll come on to that later or not.
Yes.
But you know, you've gone from madness with the monkeys to Cillian Murphy's cock to suddenly you've got, you know, these beautiful shots of London that you're never ever going to get again, really. It's extremely unlikely. And also it's a bit of a time capsule because you know, we're now 2019 and this was shot in 2001 when they were shooting, and in 18 years London has changed a lot architecturally. The people have not really changed that much in terms of it's still a global city full of like millions of people from all over the world, which is what make a big chunk of what makes it so exciting.
Yeah.
But like, so the people haven't necessarily changed that much, but like obviously the world has changed a lot and the design of buildings and all this sort of thing. And there are plenty of, particularly in the West End, there are bits around St Giles High Street and stuff, and that whole area around Denmark Street, that whole area around St Giles High Street, and that has completely changed. So there are bits that, so even looking at it, like when I watched it recently, it's like, that's totally changed. So so that has
interesting.
So even if all that there was in 28 Days Later was that would be worth seeing. And also another interesting thing I will add is that during the bits where he's walking around, there's a Canadian band, I'm not even sure if they're still going, but there was a Canadian band who were really hot just before, about sort of 98, 99, called Godspeed You Black Emperor. And there was crazy mob, instrumental group of loads of them made this, what I'd describe as, I don't know, I guess you'd call it space noise rock. Of kind of anyone who's wondering what that sounds like, I guess bands like Mogwai do it really well. Bands like Explosions in the Sky do it really well. But Godspeed You Black Emperor were this band who did it quite heavily at the end of the 90s. And anyway, Danny Boyle got them involved and used their tune East Hastings, which is what you can hear. It's like the slow, like very, very quiet stuff, and then it suddenly reaches a crescendo. There's other music later in the film which we can talk about later.
We'll get to that.
But like, so that's kind of interesting, that the Godspeed You Black Emperor soundtrack with all these beautiful shots of London, and you're like, that's only sort of, you know, you even up to that point you're only 10 minutes in. So now I'm going to jump forward.
Yes.
Now I'm going to jump forward because everyone listening is probably thinking, dude, hurry up, man.
We're doing this in real time.
Literally, you're going to talk about it for the whole film. Anyway, just to speed it up a bit. Cillian Murphy's walking around, he sees a couple of people, and then he also sees a load of these lunatic infected people, and he's trying to get away from the lunatic infected people. You've got Cillian Murphy and Naomi Harris and Brendan Gleeson and his daughter, and they become basically the four. Yeah. And then they struggle to get out of London, and then eventually they get out of London and head towards Manchester because they've managed to pick up a signal, because That's one thing about a zombie film. There's and actually horror films in general, even if it's there's always a distress signal.
Yes.
Or there's always like, oh, you can save us, or you can do this, or whatever. There's always something like that. That's like such a big horror trope, and not even horror. Sometimes sci-fi and whatever. Anyway, eventually they drive off. They get up to Manchester. Although, I've been to Manchester, I wouldn't be in a hurry to get up there. And there's a blockade, and then there's these soldiers, and Brendan Gleeson, I think, gets bitten on the way and starts having a big mad freak out. And then the soldiers grab Naomi Harris and the daughter and obviously our main man, Cillian Murphy. And then the soldiers take them back to this safe place, which is this big mansion out in the sticks. And then the film takes like a really interesting detour.
Yes.
And it becomes, as a lot of these films invariably do, it becomes less about the horrors from without and more about the horrors from within.
Yeah. There you go. So, I mean, first of all, I guess I'll ask you, what do you think of this film? I mean, do you remember when you first saw it? Did you see it when it first came out? And if so, what was your reaction when you first saw it?
Right, so, although it was a hip film to go and see.
Yeah, it was.
I don't think I saw it at the cinema. I think, and it was just weird because I was banging into films. So I think probably I first saw 28 Days Later on maybe VHS, maybe DVD.
Yeah.
I really can't remember, but I definitely saw it on a pretty low quality TV.
Yeah.
Not particularly good sound. Maybe with some other people. I remember thinking, oh, that's pretty good. But and maybe even, oh, that's very good. But it didn't really blow me away, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think now, having watched it 15, nearly 20 years later, I think it stands up. I mean, I hate to say this, because I say it about so many. I mean, you know, Mike, the same as you, mate. I see films day in, day out. I don't know, 400 a year or whatever the hell. Probably like most of the people listening to this pod, we're all into film. We're all into horror films. We all see a lot of films, and as you know, if you see a significant amount of films, the one thing you know is that nearly every damn film you see, especially at the moment, is between 10 and 30 minutes too long.
Yeah,
right?
It's my main complaint.
Oh, isn't it? You know, if you're going to sit and watch a film, 90 minutes is ideal. You know, an hour and 20 if it's absolutely banging and wicked. Beyond that, it's like, have a word with yourself. You know, we don't need this self-indulgence. Save it for a TV show or whatever. 28 Days Later, I think, is like 113 minutes.
Yeah.
It doesn't need that.
Just shy of 2 hours.
Yeah, right. It doesn't need that. It could be, if it was 90 minutes, it would be absolutely red hot, borderline masterpiece. Right? 113 minutes, it's just very, very good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think anyone listening to this pod has probably already seen 28 Days Later. Has probably got their own ideas. But I mean, you know, if you're listening to the Evolution of Horror podcast, then clearly you're going to be bang up for a bit of 28 Days Later. And no, you must see it. There's some brilliant scenes in it, without a doubt. Particularly, it's bookended by brilliant scenes like the monkey chaos. The scenes where he's walking around London are really good, and the scenes in the tower block when he's rescued by a glue, they're really good. And then at the end of the film, the sort of last 15-20 minutes, it goes from creepy and weirdness and you feel uneasy watching it, to like, wow, visceral violence and excellent and bloodletting and exactly what you want. But kind of like so many films, it does sag a bit in the middle. Yeah, it's interesting. Bit,
I wonder whether, I think you're right. It does. It definitely has that big quiet section in the middle where they are sort of sleeping in fields and looking at, you know, horses running around, and there's supermarkets and there. But interestingly, I don't know whether it maybe needs that, because some of the scenes of horror are so intense and it's loud and it's crazy. And we should talk about the cinematography and stuff. It's so all over the shop, like you feel like you might get a headache from it during some of the scenes of horror, that I kind of appreciate the moments where it calms down a little bit. But overall, I think it's also pretty stunning, actually, and the way that Danny Boyle hadn't really done any proper horror by this point, really, and actually, God, he can do horror well. Like I think, you know, we've talked for weeks about zombie movies now. This is the first zombie movie I think that we're talking about that genuinely, I think, is a terrifying movie.
forget if this, off the top of my head, if this was the first fast zombie film.
Yeah, well, I think it is in the mainstream. I mean, there are a few obscure 80s ones, but yeah.
Right, exactly. And I think that might have been part of why it had such an impact, because
Yeah.
all of a sudden, zombies were fairly scary anyway.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, you had a bit of speed to anything that's on screen, a killer coming after you, whatever. When it's these people who are literally going to take a chunk out of your body and then they're going to devour you, and that's that, mate. Too bad. You know, wow. It is furious, isn't it? And that's what's kind of...
Furious is a great word.
You'd almost say it's almost like horror pushing into an action film, isn't it?
Yeah, almost.
You know what I mean?
Almost.
And that's kind of... That gives it that kind of edge to it. That kind of like... And the cutting of it as well. It's edited really, really nicely. You know what I
Everything
mean?
about the film feels fast and immediate and furious, like you said. It's everything about it. So not just not just what's happening within the world of the film, but the way it's shot and edited. It takes your breath away. Almost, right?
Exactly. I mean, generally speaking, that's one of almost sort of Danny Boyle's trademarks.
It is.
Hello. I've come about the room.
I mean, I love Shallow Grave, right? You know, his opening film. You know, it's just excellent from start to finish. It's dark. It's like a modern Scottish film noir, isn't it? Really, you know, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
Great characters, gruesome, funny, dark. What you want out of a film, really.
Yes.
And then he goes from that to make Trainspotting, which, as I've written in various places and I still stand by, it's probably the most important British film of the 90s, Trainspotting.
Yeah, I agree.
Choose life. Choose a job. Choose a career. Choose a family. Choose a fucking big television. Choose washing machines.
Although Shallow Grave had a lot of great cuts and was brutal, with Trainspotting you really, for me, see the start of that Danny Boyle style.
Yes.
That fast, trademark, bang, 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 there it is. And I know afterwards he did stuff like A Life Less Ordinary, which was slagged and isn't that good, but that's a fast film.
Yeah.
And that's really good. And then you kind of see that in 28 Days Later. It's that fast, that chop, 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 and you're watching it, and it's really exciting to watch.
Yeah,
it's really... I mean, I'm up for a bit of slow cinema now and again, but the bits in the action sequences and the bits where he's I mean, I know he's not physically cutting it himself, but he's obviously been in the edit suite watching it being chopped up, and if he didn't like it, he'd say, no, we don't want it like that. You know what I mean?
Definitely. And you're right, you know, Trainspotting literally starts with Ewan McGregor running down the street, and it's like boom, boom, boom,
and
that's straight away
it.
sets the pace, doesn't it?
Exactly. And then, like I say, when you get to 28 Days Later, it's like that. And then if you look later at what Danny Boyle was done, he's had a few missteps. I mean, Trance I don't care for very much, and then 127 Hours I thought was kind of interesting. Slumdog Millionaire, a lot of people don't like it, but I thought it was all right. But what I really like actually is he's another film he did with Cillian Murphy, Sunshine, which I love. You know, it's like a kind of, I guess it's sci-fi, but it's sci-fi horror.
It is,
really, because it's got that mystery
movie
to it, and it's got that. The sort of defeated kind of ending of it, the sacrifice and whatever that goes with it, you know. Sorry, that's a spoiler for anyone, but you should, if you haven't seen Sunshine, that's really not killing the mood of it.
No.
It's a brilliant bit of sci-fi that if you're going to watch it on a indoors, if you've got a projector, use that. If you haven't got a projector, then you just see it on the big, like anything really, see it on the biggest possible TV you can, because Sunshine, it's really blistering and it scorches your retinas watching it. It's an amazing film. But yeah, so Danny Boyle's career, I mean, I know he's just made, I've not seen it yet because I don't think anyone outside the studios have seen it, but like, he just made Yesterday, which looks a bit poor. Of course he would have made, it's a shame that he fell out with Barbara Broccoli and on all the producers, you know, at Eon for Bond 25. Because I would have loved to have seen him make a Bond film.
He'd have nailed it.
Yeah, you know, because for a start, he knows how to shoot action.
Yeah.
He knows how to work with characters. He knows how to work with big actors. He knows how to scare people. He knows how to thrill people. You know, and he knows how to put a bit of humour in his films. He can do all that. He's love him or loathe him, with Danny Boyle, he can make films and he can make decent films. I think he would have been an interesting Bond director. And now he didn't do that, and now he's done Yesterday. It's like,
well, it's interesting. He does seem to struggle, like a lot of directors that I love. He seems to struggle when it comes to making big mainstream films with mainstream studios, right? So he obviously had massive success with Shallow Grave and then Trainspotting, and then he got into that sort of late 90s period where, like you said, he did A Life Less Ordinary, which was a bit of a flop, and then The Beach, which was a big flop. And that was his that was supposed to be his big mainstream American studio movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Yep. And it did really badly. And again, it was written by Alex Garland. It could have been something really successful, and it wasn't. And 28 Days Later was almost then him going back to almost like an indie film vibe to it. You know,
it's low budget, right?
Yeah, low budget DV camera running around London again.
Semi-doc style,
and
almost,
it feels like that's more where he's more at home in a weird way, even though he's this hugely successful director. You know?
That's interesting. And of course, years later he went back to did Trainspotting 2, which was pretty good. I saw him introduce that at a screening, and he seems like a good bloke. And of course, it would be remiss of us not to say his incredible Olympic 2012 opening ceremony that he directed. Particularly he had to fight to keep in the NHS bit. Yep. So obviously he's a big hero for doing that, because, not to get political, I know this is a horror podcast, but I'm of the opinion that the NHS is the best thing about Great Britain. So there you go. So
absolutely.
If you don't believe in that, send a turd in a jiffy bag to me, right? Well, no, please don't. Okay, I don't really want to receive that, but if you want to, then send it to Mike instead.
Exactly. Send it straight to me. I totally agree, and I think I love Danny Boyle, and for me, you're right. Yesterday doesn't look particularly great, but he is one of those directors that I will go and watch it purely because it's him. Like, there's a handful of directors that you get that with, and he is one of those. I mean, and also, like, not to mug the geezer off, yesterday actually might be really good. We'll all know in 6 months or 3 months or whenever it comes out. I've forgotten the release date. Exactly.
So.
He does a brilliant job. Interestingly, with 28 Days Later, he says he denies it being a zombie movie, and this is an argument that's gone on amongst horror fans for the last 15-16 years.
Yep.
Do you think is 28 Days Later a zombie movie?
Well, all right, strictly by the book, if we're saying that a zombie can only be someone who is dead and has risen from the grave, well, strictly speaking, no, it ain't. But come on.
Yeah.
Come on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let's not split hairs, right? It's about these nutters who get a bit crazy in the eyes, and then they're going to chew you and eat you to death.
Yes.
They're going to eat your body. I call that a zombie.
Exactly.
You know
and it's got that...
Really?
It's got that post-apocalyptic vibe, a band of survivors banding together, facing off against these infected people. Yeah, I mean, I would say, other than the fact that it doesn't have traditional zombies, it ticks every other zombie box, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also, like you say, it's great as a post-apocalyptic film. It's a great London film, even though it's only a half London film because it goes elsewhere. Yes. It's great because it does that and it documents. Actually, it reminded me, I don't know if you've ever seen The Day the Earth Caught Fire. You ever seen that? Val Guest, 1961. So. You ever seen that? So what's great about that is it's basically nuclear testing that they're doing shifts the Earth off its axis, and the Earth tilts, and then basically we get, I don't know can't remember the science behind it, but the basically the sun is heating up the Earth, and they work out that we've only got like 8 days until it gets too hot and we're all going to fry. So it's all set in London. It's about this reporter, and he's running around and he's trying to please his editor, and there's a woman involved, blah blah blah. Anyway, the reason I bring that up, aside from the fact that it's a quality film and you need to check it out if you ain't, the reason I bring it up is watching 28 Days Later and him strolling about, and it's like, he's wandering and there's no one around and it's all bleak, and there's loads of that in The Day the Earth Caught Fire. Right. I wonder if Danny Boyle sort of had half an eye on that, or would have seen that, maybe. Possibly, because it's got that post-apocalyptic vibe to it. So, and it's got that London vibe to it. So yeah, maybe. But this is what's interesting about actually the 28 Days Later, is that aside from being a great horror film, great zombie film, great post-apocalyptic film, and a great London film, it's kind of no, actually, that's all of them. That's all of them. But you know what I mean? It does cross, and sometimes you can watch a film and go, it's a good comedy, or it's a good this, or it's a good western, or whatever, and it is what it is. But with this, it's quite a crowd pleaser in that respect.
It is. I think it transcends just being a horror film or a zombie film because of that. My parents, who hate zombie films, wanted to watch 28 Days Later because they'd seen the clips of London and they thought, it looked good, and it looks, and it is, and it impresses people, doesn't it? And it is. You do watch that going, it's so much easier now with CGI, but you watch that back then and go, how the hell did he manage that? Like you just said, filming in London is a ball ache.
It is.
It's incredible. It's like an amazing magic trick or something, seeing those opening few shots.
Hello!
let me ask you briefly about the performances. I mean, we've got Cillian Murphy in a very early role for him. We've got Naomi Harris in a really early role for her. Later on, you've also got Brendan Gleeson. You've got Christopher Eccleston. It's a good cast, right? I mean, what do you think? Do you rate the performances in this?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to see Irishman Brendan Gleeson, who I'm a huge fan of. He's done so many great roles in Bruges, The Guard, Calvary, etc., etc. You know, great films. Brilliant actor. Brings a sort of charm and a wit and
he does, and he brings a kind of warmth to it, doesn't he?
To pretty much everything he does.
Yeah.
But he has a go at being a London cabbie, and I think does pretty well. The accent, if you listen carefully, there are moments when you're like, but he kind of gets away with it because he's kind of believable, and you know, he could even be a cab driver with Irish roots or whatever, couldn't he? Really, you know, there's no problem with that. He's really good in it.
I've got to admit, I know this is harsh because it's a child actor, but I don't think the daughter's very good.
She's not great. She ain't really got a lot to do.
I know, exactly. I know. She's just the victim in the second half of the film, isn't she? But every now and then she'll have a line and she'll go, "You heard what Dad said. We shouldn't be good." And I was really, come on, Danny Boyle, get a slightly better actor for this. But overall, I think everyone does a brilliant job. I think Naomi Harris is great.
She's wicked. She's really, really good.
She really pops off the screen. I think when she's there.
Oh yeah. No, I'm with you. I mean, and actually, it's kind of. I mean, obviously, he's had a lot of different roles. Did he play Doctor Who, Christopher Eccleston?
He did.
And you know, he was quite good at one of his early roles. I remember when he was on Cracker. I think he plays this copper who gets killed.
Right. Yeah.
Funnily enough, I think he plays a copper who gets killed by Robert Carlyle.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Good link.
When you think about it, but we'll come to that later. But like,
Christopher Eccleston is great in it because
he's a real sleazebag.
He's a sleazebag, but you can't help but kind of like him, at least initially.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like he's got an interesting role in it. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, generally speaking, that I thought, you know, it feels like this film is in kind of two halves, I suppose, and you've got this first half that is very much a zombie movie where they're running from the infected, and then the second half is, like you say, it takes a bit of a turn. It goes into something a bit different, and we'll get to that in a minute. Generally speaking, kind of any highlights for you in terms of the kind of scenes of horror or action in that first half? I mean, I'm a big fan of the scene in the tunnel when all the rats come running down. I think that's a great image, isn't it? That the rats are running from the infected. You know, it's great, and it's again, it's that kind of heart in your mouth tension that Danny Boyle is very good at in this film.
Jesus Christ! Oh no! Fucking rats! Get off! Come on!
Oh yeah, I mean that's really grim. I mean, you see one rat, that's enough, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's kind of like an inverse Pied Piper kind of thing, isn't it?
I know, and it's like that's how vile the infected are. Like the vermin is running.
Yeah, like
from
people
them.
are legging it. Like even the rats are running away.
It's great. It's great.
I mean, I'll be honest. Yeah, of the first half, that is one of the highlights. But I'd really love the bit in the tower block where. And that's the thing, in tower blocks generally, I mean, I know tunnels are kind of, you know, claustrophobic and whatever, but having walked up and down a million tower blocks and so on myself, you can be walking in a moody tower block in London occasionally to go to a party or whatever. What that, you know, so you know when you're sort of walking around, it can be a little bit edgy, or sometimes, I mean, I've got no fear because, you know, I'm too old. Maybe when I was 15, 16, I don't give a monkeys now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like in that film, they've got the combination of, you know, they're walking out, it's this dark, pretty rough sort of tower block, and then suddenly you can hear the infected, and then suddenly at the top there's a bloke with a gun, and then has Brendan Gleeson got a gun? I think, has he got a gun, or he's got some sort of? He's definitely got some stuff on, hasn't he? He's got the mask or a shield.
That's right. He's got like kind of sort of SWAT gear.
Yeah, totally. So he's got all that on. And, that kind of... So you've suddenly got this bloke and you can't see what the hell he's about. You're trying to get into this flat, the infected, and it's a scary environment anyway. And I think, the twisting of all those different factors, that whole sequence for me, I love. plus, I've got this weird thing about I love tower block scenes in films anyway.
Yeah, they're great, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, Atomic Blonde has got a brilliant one, and
I mean, even movies like The Raid and Dread, and
I was just about to say Dread because, of course, Dread and The Raid and Raid 2 are brilliant anyway. But Dread, of course, links us back to our man Alex Garland.
Yes.
Who I think wrote that. Did he? I don't think he directed it.
He didn't direct it. He wrote it, yeah.
But of course, you know, he's obviously very good at getting to the heart of tension and throwing different ideas in, whether they're sociological ideas or whether they're just entertaining, exciting ideas that are going to make people want to watch your film, and people come out going, "Oh, that was pretty good."
Exactly. It's a great combination of like kind of claustrophobic settings like the tower block and the tunnel and the church, and these big wide open spaces like London and like the fields with the horses, and it's got that really kind of nice. Again, it's a nice pacing thing where Danny Boyle kind of lets you take a breath every now and then, and lets you kind of enjoy the quiet countryside or quiet London, you know, that you've never seen before, or whatever, before it then suddenly something hits you again with a handheld camera. Oh shit, somebody's running at them. It's an interesting, you never quite know when suddenly something is going to burst through a door or tear someone's throat out as soon as you're in a moment of quiet for a minute. So
yeah, and it also kind of begs the question, are we at most risk when we're isolated and alone, right? Or are we at most risk when we're in a claustrophobic situation with people?
Yeah.
And it's difficult because that's the thing. Cillian Murphy in this film has bits of both, right?
He does, exactly. And it's that classic thing, again, of a zombie film of like kind of, what would I do? Where am I safest? Well, if you absolutely barricaded yourself in at the top of a tower block, you could be safe. But then again, you're totally trapped there. Are you better off having somewhere where there's an easy escape route, blah blah blah, you know? And it's an interesting, and again, I think this film explores all of those different options, doesn't it?
Yeah, but when you say that, of course, that immediately makes me think of 9/11.
And okay, so we should talk about this as well, because I you know, we've talked about this with every single horror subgenre because it's important. I think that the horror genre, well, cinema, I think, changed post 9/11.
Oh yeah, completely.
The horror genre definitely did, because you can see a clear change happen where films start becoming a lot more, in some ways, nihilistic, a lot more brutal, a lot more nasty. I guess just reflecting this mood of paranoia, fear, everything else, you know, torture porn, and you get found footage, and you get movies like Cloverfield, which is obviously the ultimate kind of post 9/11 horror movie in a way.
Destruction of New York, etc., etc.
And obviously, like you said earlier, this movie was being filmed before 9/11, so maybe this is just a coincidence, but it feels like the ultimate post 9/11 zombie movie.
Well, it's interesting actually. In that respect, it's a bit like people talking about films that come out now as being Trump era films, but a lot of them have been, you know, because films, as we know, can take 10 years to get made.
Yeah.
If we look at 28 Days Later, you know, the bit I said earlier about the notes around Piccadilly Circus, and then Danny Boyle clocked it and said, you know, but he also actually said that when they were making it, the shooting around London and the access they got when they were doing it, you couldn't do that after 9/11.
There you go.
So there you go.
Yeah.
So actually, this film, regardless of what it has on screen, it would have been made a different way, or it might not have looked the same had it been literally shot, you know, 2 or 3 months later, because they were still shooting it in October 2001.
Right.
Right.
So it had happened by that point.
But apparently the London bits, those bits were done pre 9/11. So and then of course what's interesting is, if we know that if they were still shooting after 9/11, right, then they must have chopped it up in the edit suite after.
Yeah.
And there's no way having that event, which like
especially at that point in time.
Even now, like nearly 20 years later, it's if not the defining moment so far of the 21st century, then it's one of them.
Dad?
Keep away from me!
Dad?
Keep away from me! Keep away from me! Keep away! Keep away! Keep away!
What's wrong? Dad!
Jen! Jen is infected!
No! No!
Jen! No! Jen, kill it!
But yeah, you know, like we say, horror, of course, plays by its own rules anyway.
Yeah, it does, and I think it always reflects the point of horror. I suppose is to scare people, so people's fears change and evolve, and so the films change and evolve. But I think also the other thing that 9/11 coincided with was this emergence in mobile phones and everything being filmed all the time. So I think when we think of 9/11, we might think of people filming stuff on their mobile phones running around in the street or whatever. So you've got that kind of handheld verite feel.
Oh, totally.
And I think that is something that definitely Danny Boyle captures again in this film. The film opens, literally the first shots you see are news footage of violence and riots and all of that kind of thing, right? And then the film kind of takes that news style and runs with it for the rest of the film.
Right, so I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I had been thinking about that earlier today and I'd completely forgotten. So, in my usual style.
Yeah.
So, one of my favourite things in any film, whether it's horror or whatever, is footage, and whether it's constructed fake footage or whether it's real footage of carnage, apocalypse, dissent, revolution, insurrection on the streets.
Yeah.
I love anything like that, partly because I'm like a bit of a wind-up merchant and agitator myself, but partly because, come on, rebellion is sexy, right?
Yeah, it is.
And if you don't find rebellion sexy, what is wrong with you? You know what I mean? Because I don't want to sit there and abide by the rules. Like, I go to work and I love my job. I got a blinding job, but I don't want to be caged. I feel like a caged bird in an office. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Maybe there is a part of me that when I see this footage of this carnage and this anarchy on the streets, makes me go, wow, yeah, I like that. But anyway, coming back to specifically with 28 Days Later, I'm not sure whether the stuff at the start is stuff they've specially shot or whether it's news footage they gathered. It looks very much like news footage they've gathered.
Yeah, it does.
It's definitely got that look to it.
It does.
And what is really, really cool when you watch it is the way it pans down to the monkey and you see you're thinking, oh my God, it's live. And then of course, the monkey is watching it. So there's, of course, the monkey is watching it because they're testing the animals, right? But you're also thinking Clockwork Orange when you're watching it.
Oh, exactly. It's amazing. There are so many layers to that opening, isn't there? Because it's
really,
like,
really good.
Is this also saying that news is too violent and brutal?
Right.
Is it saying that watching TV changes us? Blah 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 blah. Has an effect, damages our brains.
Right. But what's interesting, like in another sense, actually, is that it's kind of foreshadowing because it's this carnage on the streets, and of course, at that point in the story, there's just a load of monkeys in some cages, and there's some animal rights activists coming in because, of course, that's the point of the story. And then it's really what it is. It's kind of a foreshadowing of, you know what? There's going to be some crazy stuff coming on.
Totally. And again, going back to the zombie subgenre, this is something that I think, Mary Wild, Freudian cinephile Mary Wild from the BFI.
Yeah, I know Mary.
Who really knows her stuff. And she was talking about zombies really interestingly as a point of view of kind of like the id taking form, as in a way, this idea that like civilization crumbles and people become animals essentially, and it does, and there's a sense of that in 28 Days Later.
Totally.
We've all talked about, you can spend a day in London and that inside there is real rage amongst all these people, but it's
you see
also
it every night on the tube home every night. You see it.
But it's the British way to not really vocalise that rage, or usually to keep it stiff upper lip, and everyone kind of doesn't really interact and talk to each other, and everyone kind of stews silently.
And now
and
again,
inside.
it'll come out like in the 2011 riots. It'll come out
Exactly,
every now and
exactly.
again, or in the early 80s, it'll come out some way or another. Actually, I've just remembered something, which is, for once, it's a digression, but it's a zombie-related digression. So I'm not suddenly going to talk about like washing up or something. I'm actually going to get to the point, right? With that opening sequence, that carnage, that footage that the monkey is watching, it really reminded me of the Dawn of the Dead remake. The Zack Snyder remake. So I love the original Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
The remake I actually quite like.
Yeah, it's quite a good remake, yeah.
But for me, there's an incredible pre-credit sequence, which is just absolute carnage, which I love. And then the title sequence is Johnny Cash's When the Man Comes Around, which is an absolute masterpiece of a tune, over that sort of footage. And again, you can't tell whether it's real stuff that's been shot, but it looks like real stuff that's been shot. It's all this news footage of like people setting fire to themselves in the streets, people like getting strung up, people like throwing tear gas, the old Bill throwing tear gas about, anarchy, windows getting smashed, civilization breaking down. And it's like, you watch that Dawn of the Dead, and you're like, wow, what a film. And sadly, after the incredible pre-credit sequence, and then that amazing, mind-blowing credit sequence, the rest of the film is kind of all right, and it never really lives up. It certainly doesn't live up to the original. Well, when you're watching 28 Days Later, the film more or less does live up to that.
Yeah. And actually, 28 Days Later, you know, I think I would argue is the most influential zombie movie of the 21st century. I think, you know, you can basically draw a line in the sand like you did with Night of the Living Dead, and you can say zombie movies before 28 Days Later and zombie movies after it. And Dawn of the Dead, that remake, clearly owes so much of a debt to 28 Days Later. Like you said, the news footage, the running zombies, the verite feel, you know.
Yeah, without a doubt. No, I mean, there's been various polls, as there always polls in there because it gets people talking, and it's been, you know, like one of the greatest horror films, you know, of the 100 of the 21st century, and it's one of the top 100 British horror films, and blah 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 blah. And the truth of the matter is, it probably is, and it's been massively influential, and Danny Boyle generally is massively influential, so he's worth talking about as a filmmaker just for that.
He is.
But like you say, without him, Fast Zombies probably wouldn't have been such a big idea in the zombie movie genre, and indeed horror and whatever. So like you say, the Dawn of the Dead remake wouldn't be quite the same. World War Z, which ain't really that good, but it's, you know. And also The Girl with All the Gifts, which is pretty good. That has got Fast Zombies, I think.
Yeah, and also that's definitely got that 28 Days Later. I mean, I know it's based on a book, but The Girl with All the Gifts, you know, that kind of empty London feel and everything else, post-apocalyptic London.
There's definitely post-apocalyptic business going on.
Yeah, no, I think you can see its influence on everything, and I think probably it was massively successful, obviously, 28 Days Later.
Yeah,
and
made
I
plenty
think
of money,
without
didn't
that,
it?
we may not have ended up with The Walking Dead and every other big zombie property since, I think. So it's got a huge legacy, I think, you know, good or bad.
Well, one thing you might even say, Mike, is that without 28 Days Later, maybe you wouldn't be doing this series of this.
Yeah, no, totally.
You know?
It could have been a.
You might have jumped from folk or slashes to something else.
Exactly. I think, you know, it could have been a subgenre that had died, or at least one that had stayed.
died and then reborn.
Exactly, or one that at least would have stayed a lot more underground, I suppose.
Well done, mate. Yeah, nice one.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating when you look at its legacy. And then finally, we'll wrap it up soon, but just generally the second half of this movie. I remember when I first watched it as a kind of gore-hungry, zombie-loving teenager, I was a little bit disappointed in the second half because it almost grinds to a bit of a halt with the rapey soldiers. And I was like, this isn't what I want to see. I want to see more of them running through tunnels from the infected.
Totally.
I appreciate this now more on another level now that I'm older. But I mean, generally speaking, do you think it works, that second half, and the way in which tonally everything changes a bit, doesn't it?
I don't know. What I mean is, I know my feeling on it is, I would have preferred it to stick around the cities and done something interesting within the cities.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm more of a city person anyway. Don't get me wrong. I watch films set anywhere on a beach or in the sky or on the moon, whatever. It doesn't really bother me. But you know, I like the first half of the film so much. For me, it loses something when it you know, it goes to Manchester and there's the blockade, and that's pretty good. But then it goes to the mansion, and I'm like, okay, and it's still good, and it's still action, and it gets
really good at the end.
And like I say, the end is like the last 10-15 minutes. You're still like, wow, you know, you're almost cheering at how good it is.
Yeah.
It's excellent, and actually, it does kind of. It's interesting the way it deviates, and it does go into that kind of the sexual slavery and stuff.
Yes,
it does give it that. It definitely gives it something that it didn't have before.
Definitely, and you know, the more I look at zombie movies, the more I realise they are about that. Basically, they're not about zombies; they're about humans in crisis and how shit humankind is when in crisis.
Without that, Garland and Boyle, what would they have done if they hadn't have given it that new edge?
Exactly,
that new spin. Oh, here we go. The humans are doing this.
Yeah, it would have just been more of the same. For 90
and
minutes.
You know what? That would have been fine because, you know, I don't mind an hour and a half of zombies going crazy. That's great. But that does give it some. That does give it that extra.
It
element.
does.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? It's like not everybody. As we know, it's very, very difficult to make any film made at all. Whether you've got millions or whether you've got peanuts, it's hard work getting a film made. But with films, a decent film and a film that's going to be successful, you haven't just got to be good. You've got to really offer something new or offer something that's quite interesting, or you've got to do something that's a little twist on whatever.
Yeah.
And that is the twist in it. It's like, the humans being the real evil is not the twist, but the sexual slavery bit and the repopulation. I mean, it's to be honest, I'm no Kim Newman. I'm not like an expert on every damn horror film that's ever been made, but like without a doubt, that does give it an extra. Actually, what makes it interesting is that it gives it a creepy element.
It does,
which the film doesn't have until that point. The point has a scary element and a gross element, but it never really has a creep, and then it's like, you feel like you want to have a wash
definitely
after, you know what I mean,
and
that's
I think
very good.
And I think it just generally kind of emphasizes that humans are scum and basically that we all are capable of these monstrous things. Like, I think interestingly at the very beginning of our chat you sort of said the fun thing about zombie movies is that really they're never going to happen. It's kind of fun escapism. There's something about 28 Days Later that is almost, you could believe it happening from the very beginning, it is a virus that spreads this way.
And that's partly because it's shot that way as well,
exactly.
Right?
There's something about it that feels so real, and like it's all the elements we've already talked about. It's the newsy elements, it's the handheld camera, it's the acting, it's everything. But also there is this element of like human beings have this rage in them, and this disease just brings it to the surface, because, and I think that comes really literally in that last act when Cillian Murphy is running around the kind of fort killing people, and it almost looks and is shot and portrayed as an infected, right, when he's kind of he's gone feral almost with rage, killing soldiers and killing people.
He becomes like one of them, doesn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think there's that comparison drawn quite obviously at the end, where we don't actually know if he's one of the infected or not. And all that's really clever, and I think all of that stuff you kind of appreciate more and more upon rewatches, which is really interesting. Last thing I want to ask you about, because we touched upon it briefly, but the music. I think the soundtrack is quite iconic. Right.
Isn't it? So that's it. There's I forget the actual name of it. I did have it written down.
It's a John Murphy
track.
No,
that's it. John Murphy. Right. So John Murphy's, which is the sort of main theme in the sort of final scenes, and then it's replayed quite a lot in 28 Weeks Later.
It's a bit overused in 28 Weeks
Later.
Actually.
It's used 3 or 4 times or whatever. But now I it's one of those bits of music that I feel like it's played in. It's been since played on telly and in adverts and whatever.
It's used in like every X Factor VT and stuff. It's one of those
to create a bit of tension, or to say, "Oh no, isn't this difficult, guys? Someone's going to get voted out of the house." Whereas, of course, in the film, it's more like someone's going to get their face chewed off. You know what I mean?
Let's just briefly talk about the sequel. So naturally, there was a sequel that came out a few years later, 28 Weeks Later. It is the classic sequel in that it is kind of the same but bigger.
Yes.
Right? It's more characters, bigger scale. So this is 28 Weeks Later. Everything has changed. The infection has come and gone. A bunch of American soldiers come in and try to kind of turn the United Kingdom back into a sort of habitable place again, and shit goes down. I mean, very briefly, what did you think of the sequel? Does it live up to the first one?
It doesn't quite live up to the first one, but it is actually quite a decent film, and actually a lot better, having watched it very recently.
We both watched it today, didn't we? We both watched it today.
Yeah, in different homes, but we both watched it today. Like, it's very good.
Yeah.
But it's not quite as good as 28 Days Later. A part of that is obviously the novelty value or whatever.
Oh, totally. I think, as far as horror sequels go, I watched it today and I thought, this is really good. It's better than I remember it.
Yeah.
I particularly love the first half. I think the opening scene in the farmhouse is
stunning. God, that opener. I'm a sucker for a film with a great, as you heard from me raving on about the Dawn of the Dead remake, right? I'm a sucker. And obviously I spent 20 minutes talking about the opening of 28 Days Later. But the opening, you've got like a minute or two of chatting in a farmhouse, bit of tension, and then it goes mental.
Yeah,
You've got like 8 minutes of this absolute insanity, and the running down, and Robert Carlyle running down in the fields towards the boat, and then the boat bit is insane.
Oh, it's so
Oh
good.
my God, if
So
the rest
good.
of the film was as good as that, I mean, in the rest of the film is pretty good.
It's pretty good. It's just, I think the second half of the film is like non-stop action and non-stop kind of that Danny Boyle style, and it's not directed by Danny Boyle,
No.
but obviously they've gone, oh, let's do what the first film did, and it's that kind of crazy juddery handheld camera, but it sustains it for like 45 minutes of this film while all of these kind of big action set pieces are taking place in the middle of London, and it's a bit much. It's a bit. I found it got a bit tedious in the second half, but I did love the setup, and I thought it was, you know, an interesting new slant on that mythology.
Plus, while I'm waving my London flag, it is very much still quite a decent London film, and there's bits set down the tube, and you see different landmarks, and it's
Arguably even more London than the first one, because it is from beginning to end London, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah,
Decent film.
it's good. What do you reckon? Will there ever be another 28 Days Later? In 2030, will we see a 28 years later? I don't know.
Oh, nice. Well, I mean, look, the way you can never ever write it off.
No, especially these days.
No, especially. I mean, look at it, right? One of the big sort of Hollywood news stories of the last 6 months, I guess, would be the fact that Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter, is it Alex Winter?
Yeah.
They're going to do Bill's Head 3, right?
Exactly.
And I love the first two, and I think the second one in particular is well underrated.
Yeah.
But I'm really looking forward to it, and I will go and see it, and I will enjoy it, I expect, unless it's completely terrible. But I didn't really need it.
No way!
So you never know. All of these properties, they come back, don't they? And 28 Days Later, it feels almost untapped in that it only has one sequel. And it's like, there's potential there. The second one ends, spoiler alert, with the infection spreading into Europe and into France.
You could do stuff with that, yeah.
And I was already thinking there could be some kind of post-Brexit Europe
zombie
infection
do that.
movie.
You could make that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what... off the top of my head, I'm trying to think if there's ever been a zombie film made in Paris. That might be an interesting angle. Yeah. I mean, obviously, everyone knows Barcelona. I think it's Barcelona with Wreck, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
Wreck,
is the next film we're doing after this.
Oh, you're doing that?
Yeah.
Oh, well, Wreck is
stunning.
Oh, Wreck is if not my... No, I mean, it's not quite up there with Night of the Living Dead or that... But Wreck is... And the sequels are really good as well.
Right, Lou, I'm going to wrap this up, otherwise we'll be talking for 5 more hours, probably.
I think we might be, mate.
Thank you so much for joining me. I've got to ask what I ask everyone.
Wicked.
What is your favourite horror movie?
Well, my favourite horror movies, I'm sure we'll get on to another point. Look, I caveat this by saying... I know, I go around the houses. I'm sorry, okay?
No, go on.
I caveat this by saying I love Scream. I love Nightmare on Elm Street, which is probably the first horror film I really got into. And I love Halloween, Scream, and Nightmare on Elm Street. I love, and Texas Chainsaw. Oh my God, right? Yeah. Oh my God.
That's my
Oh my
fave,
God.
yeah.
Oh my God. What a film. But my favourite horror film... Oh, and Candyman I love as well. Mm-hmm. But my favourite horror film has to be The People Under the Stairs.
Oh, I'm so happy. You're the first person ever on this podcast that cited The People Under the Stairs as their favourite horror movie.
We'll have a word about that another time.
Oh, I fucking love it.
Yeah, well, The People Under the Stairs... we will talk about it. Maybe as we've said, maybe on this.
Well, next time when we come to cover that film, you're in, mate. Absolutely.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is the thing for the listeners. Whether this bit will be cut or not, I'm going to say it right. So me and Mike, we were talking about doing something on the pod for a long time. And I was like, I want to do The People Downstairs, I want to do it. And he was like, mate, I'm making a Ghost Stories season. And then I was like, oh, yeah, of course. And I was like, tail between the legs. But the truth is, like, of course, wasn't the right time to talk about it. But, maybe coming soon, or not soon, but at some point. Anyway, just very, very briefly about The People Under the Stairs. It's the Wes Craven film that no one really talks about, because everyone goes on about Scream, which is obviously... great, and Nightmare on Elm Street, which is obviously great, and various sequels, and Freddy's New Nightmare, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which I love and is way underrated, and The Hills Have Eyes, I think, is here very early, and there's various other things, but no one, for reasons I can never fathom, no one really talks about The People Under the Stairs, but it's so brilliant.
It's so good.
It's not quite a zombie film again, but you know what? All I can say to anyone listening is, if you've not seen The People Under the Stairs, right, check it out.
Love it, absolutely. Lou, thank you so much for joining me. This has been so much fun. Where can people find you if they want to come sort of find stuff you've written, or if they want to come and say hello on Twitter or whatever? Where can they find you?
Well, in person, you can find me usually at various press screenings, and you can find me at Tottenham Hotspur singing along, to watching some pretty mediocre football. But no, online. Okay, that's what you bent, isn't it? Online, you can find me on Twitter. I don't even know what my damn name is. Oh yeah, London. Unsurprisingly, London_Lou is my Twitter handle.
Perfect.
You can find me if you just literally go on. If you Google BFI and then Lou Thomas, right,
yes.
You'll find me, and there's a blurb and a picture of my stupid face, and links to all my BFI work and me Little White Lies work and all the other damn stupid foolish stuff I do. And if you see me, come and say hello. I'm usually making some sort of crude joke and getting thrown out somewhere or other. Yeah,
love it, Lou. Thank you so much,
Mike. It's been a pleasure.
There's no need to execute me, Sir Devos. I'll be dead before the dawn.
Hello everybody. Now, that little clip just there, I'm sure the more astute of you will have noticed it came from what seems to be the most talked about television episode ever made, this week's Game of Thrones. Now, as this week's Game of Thrones episode was so zombie-centric, I felt like it's just wrong, really, for me not to talk about it. So that's going to be this week's Patreon episode. I am joined by TV and film critic from The Independent. He also happens to be pretty much the biggest authority going in the UK when it comes to Game of Thrones. He's a good friend of mine. He's been on the podcast a couple of times before. Jacob Stolworthy came and chatted to me about this week's episode of Game of Thrones. We also talk a little bit about the whole series in general from a sort of zombie and horror perspective, and we speculate and make our predictions on what we think will happen in the final 3 episodes of the show. Who will live? Who will die? Who will sit on the throne? Will there even be a throne? Who knows? We make our predictions. So if you want to hear that conversation, you simply need to go to our Patreon page and sign up. Go to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. And if you donate $5 per month or more, you will have access to that episode and a whole bunch of other bonus content. If you're in the UK, you will also get sent an Evolution of Horror sticker, and you will get a 15% discount on Evolution of Horror t-shirts, which are now available to buy on our website. So one more time, if you want to become a patron and get access to all of this, simply go to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror and help support us and support the costs of making this podcast by donating $5 per month. And on that note, I want to say a big thank you to everybody in the last couple of weeks who has donated their hard-earned cash and become a patron. So a big thank you to Tarkin Mandrake, Sadie Jennings, Carmen Wells, Ben Aslett, Paolo Good, Keith Mitchell, William Clay Chastain, Austin Travis, Gareth Taylor, and Rebecca McCallum. A huge thank you to all of those wonderful people. And one more time, if you want to sign up and become a patron, simply go to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror and reap your rewards. Okay, let's return to the second half of our episode, in which we're going to be discussing Wreck from 2007. So, joining me to discuss this movie is probably one of the most frequent guests on the podcast. I think she's been on about 7 or 8 times now altogether. She was here last year discussing Suspiria with me, Hereditary. She joined me for the end of year review. She is a programmer at the BFI, and she also makes up one half of the fabulous collective known as The Final Girls. So you're about to hear me and Anna discuss all things Wreck. Enjoy. Okay, welcome back, Anna. Hello.
Hi, Mike.
So good to have you back. So this year we're talking all things zombie movies. This is one of my personal favourites. But first of all, before we get into this movie, what do you think of zombie movies in general? Are you a fan of this sort of subgenre?
I am. Yeah, I definitely am. It's a lot more difficult, I think, for zombie movies to say something new, because there's a lot of, not rules, there's a lot of tropes, and it's kind of the zombies themselves as villains are not that interesting because they don't do that much. So, you know, if the most exciting thing within a genre is whether a zombie runs really slowly or runs really quickly, you can get bored quite easily. I must confess, I'm not a big fan of The Walking Dead. I just haven't seen it. I've seen 2 episodes. But yeah, I love the classics. I love a lot of the different kind of takes on zombie movies, Wreck being one of them as well. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's particularly my personal favorite go-to, but I do enjoy them and have nothing against them. And I always enjoy especially the ones that try to do something a little bit different.
Totally. It's a little bit like slashers, it reminds me of, right? Where you get some really good ones and you also get some terrible ones, and there's a lot of them, and they're quite, you know, like you said, they stick to tropes. They're formulaic. Exactly. What is your plan, Anna, for surviving the zombie apocalypse? What would you do? Where would you go?
Oh, I'd probably be one of the first ones to die. I run really, really slowly. I'm terribly clumsy. I have no sense of direction. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be one of the first ones to go.
Although I was talking to somebody, I thought BFI South Bank is quite a good kind of fortress-like building to hide out in, and there's loads of weird little tunnels and corridors.
I mean, if there is an outbreak at BFI South Bank, I will 100% know where I go. I will hide out in the green room because there is food and drinks there, and I can lock the door.
Yes, exactly. Well, there you go. Perfect.
Or in one of the weird corridor cupboards.
So we're going to talk all about Wreck this week. So first of all, Anna, we're going to go full spoilers with this, but first of all, just start with a little brief plot synopsis. What is Wreck all about?
So Wreck is a Spanish found footage horror film from 2007, co-directed by Jaume Balagueró and Paco Plaza. Yes. And I do warn you in advance, there's going to be a lot of me pronouncing things in proper Spanish in this episode.
Oh, I'm so glad, because I've already massacred those 2 names in my intro, so I'm going to leave that to you.
I both apologize and not apologize for it.
Exactly.
So the film centers on reporter Ángela Vidal, played by Manuela Velasco, and her cameraman, covering a firefighter intervention in an apartment building in Barcelona. And as the situation escalates, after some of the building's occupants start showing murderous and somewhat animalistic behavior, the reporter and the cameraman find themselves confined inside the building.
It's such a lovely, very simple claustrophobic setup, isn't it? Me and Lou were talking about this, funnily enough. I've got a thing for movies just set in tower blocks and stuff.
Well, movies set in one single location. I love them because
so good.
I get production wise why that would happen, because it becomes so much cheaper and so much more contained, but B, it allows characters to really delve into the story or the action or the character development, because you don't have to be bothered with moving them around from place to place.
Yes, exactly.
And also the buildings, this particular building in Barcelona, and in Barcelona as a city, there's so many kind of Gothic, interesting looking apartment buildings that are so particular to that city, even not just to Spain in particular. So I think that seeing that as opposed to what we're used to seeing, which is a very kind of, all American style of houses and kind of living situations, is always intriguing. And I feel the same way about kind of any film set in a country where or a city where I haven't grown up and lived, so I know it really well.
So you grew up and lived in Barcelona, is this right?
I'm from Barcelona.
Mate, I can't believe I've known you for however long and I never knew that about you. You actually grew up in Barcelona. That's awesome. So did you reckon, I suppose you don't see much of it, but do you recognise any of the streets and locations that they film in?
Not really, as I was rewatching it. If I Google where the building is set, which I can do right now, I probably will be able to tell you.
Oh, that's
well,
so
actually,
cool.
I might do it now.
So, yeah, because I thought actually when we see the inside of some of these apartments, they are quite weird layouts, and they've got these long corridors and shutters.
So Spanish.
So it is, yes, because part of me was like, okay, clearly this building must be real, but also have they just found somewhere that is particularly good for the story and the zombie out
I've literally lived in apartments like that.
Have you? That's so interesting. Oh, that's
the long
great.
corridors, the shutters.
Yeah.
Maybe this is generalizing, but I'll generally in Spain, people have very kind of, because it's so sunny and very hot in the summer.
Yeah, of course.
There's these very kind of intense shutters, and people usually kind of close them down at night, so it's pitch dark.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Not like here, not curtains, like hardcore shutters that kind of completely block out sunlight. Yeah. I don't personally like that, but you know, that's what people do.
It makes sense, I suppose. Keeps it cool and everything. Oh, that's cool. Oh, I did not know that. Okay, so that's really good to know. That's a good starting point, because I do think that the location is super important. To
100%. It's kind of part of it's one of the characters of the movie.
It is totally. Have you found it?
I haven't. No, I'm looking for it. It just says in Barcelona. It's like, well, no, I know that.
Exactly. So tell me a little bit about your history with this film then. When did you first see it, and what do you think of this movie generally?
To be honest, I was trying to think about it for this episode. I cannot remember when I first saw it. Probably saw it when so it came out in 2007, so probably saw it in one of my first years in university. Not in the cinema, but probably on a DVD or on a screen or in a library somewhere. And when I was rewatching it, I haven't seen it in a few years, and this is the first of what's now the Wreck franchise. And then it was remade, I think, just a year later in American, with an American version called Quarantine. But the thing that really struck me rewatching it again, that I probably didn't notice at that time, was just how naturalistic it is. And there's a thing that might be a personal gripe, might not be. In Spanish cinema, there's a couple of things here to caveats that I need to say. So in Spanish cinema and exhibition, almost every single foreign language film is dubbed in Spanish.
Interesting.
So voiceover actors become personalities and very recognizable. So, you know, there's one dude who does the voice of Tom Cruise. There's one dude who does the voice of Bruce Willis. And you kind of associate them with people as well. But that version of the language is extremely clean, very enunciated, right? Which is not how people speak in real life. So as I was rewatching this film, I was really struck by how amazing the dialogue is and the way that people speak and how they're acting, because it's so naturalistic, and that plays a lot into the reality of the film. So it is one of the kind of best examples of found footage horror, and I think the way it works so much, not because of the very kind of basic pretense of, you know, a broadcast journalist and her cameraman filming this situation, but because of the way it then interacts with people and how they're reacting. And I guess for someone who doesn't speak Spanish, they might not notice it, but it is a huge quality of the film, the fact that it feels so real, so kind of like a cheap TV documentary in many ways, which is the design. But the way that people speak to each other, where they're panicking, is so natural, and the kind of different accents of the occupants, of like the residents of the building as well, is fantastic. So the way the policeman speaks is the way the policemen speak in Spain. The way that kind of the Manuela, who's the actress, so Angela reacts when she starts freaking out, the way they swear, you know, even the last line that she says in the film is, you know, Pablo, record everything for fuck's sake. It's such a kind of a typical expression, you know, very sweary, but in a kind of, you know, you're freaking out, you don't know what's happening, you're quarantined in a building surrounded with strangers, and some of them are going nuts. That's how you would react. So I think that's a really powerful element of the film. But I'm actually curious about you first finding out about this film, because it is a low budget Spanish found footage zombie movie.
Oh yeah, well, I absolutely loved it. I loved it from the first time I saw it. I've got a bit of a weakness for found footage when it's done well. I think, you know, the problem is with found footage, we talked about this on the podcast before, but it, like you said, there's a realism to this film that is so important. I think found footage completely falls apart if it's not completely naturalistic. Otherwise, what's the point of it? It just looks like a badly shot film. Like it needs to have that sort of like pretense of reality, which this absolutely has. I watched it with Rihanna, and it was the first time she had ever seen it. And to begin with, she was like, "Oh, it's found footage." It's like, yeah, but it's a good one. Give it a chance, kind of thing. And she was totally. And by about 10 minutes in, she was like, "My God, this feels so real. This is the best." And again, neither of us speak Spanish, but she was like, this is the most convincing found footage movie I've seen, kind of thing. Like when they're just kind of interacting with the fireman at the beginning and all of that kind of thing. And the way that she talks to her cameraman kind of behind the scenes and not officially on screen and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's brilliant. It really lulls you in. And then it is, and I've talked about this already, but zombie movies are a lot of things and they're great fun, but they're not always that scary. They don't give you that kind of real uncanny fright that other subgenres do. But Wreck is scary. Like, I think probably the scariest zombie movie that I've seen. Probably, I think.
Wow,
it's
that's
like
quite a statement.
the last 10 minutes of Wreck, which we'll get to, is like my heart is in my mouth through the whole section. I just think it's amazing. Yeah, so I'm a big fan as well. Big fan. It's difficult because usually, you know, if something like this, we'd go through it kind of, you know, beat by beat, but there's not a whole lot to talk about story-wise because it is kind of beautifully simple, right?
It's pretty self-contained.
Yeah.
What's really interesting that we can't get into on this episode is the fact that how they then develop the story in the sequels.
Yes.
So Wreck has 3 sequels, 2, 3, and 4, and they all have sort of Wreck 2 is just that, and then Wreck 3 is subtitled Genesis, and then Wreck 4 is subtitled Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting. I mean, this is a little bit of behind the scenes kind of info. I find it quite interesting how Paco and Jaume co-wrote and co-directed the first 2 and then split the following ones.
Interesting.
So Wreck 3 was directed by Paco, and then Apocalypse, so Wreck 4 was directed by Jaume, and the styles of the individual directors really come through, whether it's the combined force in creating this sort of universe and how they then expanded that zombie universe basically, I thought was very intriguing. I won't go into details of each individual film. It gets quite complicated and layered, but I find that to be it's one of those franchises where it quite naturally builds on quite a simple idea.
Interesting.
So it's deceivingly simple, and it exists perfectly fine as its own standalone movie. But then if you're intrigued, you can go deeper.
Totally.
And in some ways, you know, I'm still kind of undecided myself whether the sequels kind of ruin it for me in a way.
Well, this is it. I've only seen Wreck 2 and I gave up after Wreck 2, and it wasn't a terrible film. It's still got some good moments, but it was already starting to give me more than I wanted because, and we'll get to this, but with Wreck 1, it is so, like, you don't really know what's happening and what's caused it, and then it kind of takes a bit of a turn in the last few minutes and you go, oh my God, what is actually happening here? And I kind of love that kind of unknown element is what makes it scarier for me.
And that is, exactly, the fear of the unknown is one of our most basic human fears.
Exactly.
And it's so relatable. You know, we keep using the word natural, and for me, part of it is the language, but obviously even the situation wherever you are. You know, if you're locked inside your apartment building or your house and you don't know what's going on, you're stuck there with a bunch of strangers. That's scary.
Totally.
Because it's such a possibility in real life as well. Anything could happen at any moment in your house, and you're quarantined and you don't know what's going on, and there's no information. There's no big like governmental helicopters kind of hovering outside your house. You're just locked in and you can't get out. It's terrifying.
It's terrifying, the idea that they have no one to turn to. Like, the government is keeping them in this building and not letting them out, which is absolutely horrific. It reminds me a bit as well, that kind of end sort of left turn that it takes of another found footage film. We've talked about it briefly. Brief spoiler alert for Paranormal Activity 3 if you haven't seen it. But the end of Paranormal Activity 3 takes a kind of sudden turn, doesn't it? Where it maybe starts to become a different subgenre or a different monster than we originally thought. And Wreck reminded me a bit of that as well.
Oh, Wreck, can we spoil it?
Yeah, we can spoil Wreck. Yeah.
Because Wreck 100% shifts gears in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because it almost shifts genres in a way. It goes from being a zombie movie to being a possession movie.
Yes. Well, totally. And like, interestingly, because, you know, we've talked about zombies for so long, and both of them, there are kind of, it feels like there are 2 types of zombie movies. There's very much the kind of infection movie, which is like, it's medical, it's biological, it's something passed in the blood, and it can be explained by kind of pseudoscience. And then there is like the kind of George Romero supernatural, like there's no more room in hell. People are for some reason just coming back from the dead, and we don't know what's causing it. Is it the devil? Is it whatever? And so there are these like 2, and Wreck kind of does both. It kind of starts off like it might be rabies or some sort of infection, and then you're like, holy shit, there's scary crucifixes and candles and, you know, priests and stuff.
There's a weird creature in the dark. It sets up a whole mythology in the last 10 minutes, basically.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And yes, I can totally see why a lot of people would be so intrigued to carry on watching the series then to find out more. But I kind of just love it as it is. I just think it's so
100%.
Yeah.
And I do like the other movies, but they do effectively, if you are the sort of person who wants to expand on that and continue with these characters and this narrative, they go much deeper into kind of the supernatural, demonic elements of the story, and kind of the zombie element of it is kind of a consequence.
Yes, I guess, which it so often is. Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the characters then, because zombie movies are so much about the characters, and usually I find they're quite unlikable characters. Usually in zombie movies, you're lumped with a bunch of awful people being awful to each other, fighting, bickering in some way. What do you think of our central character, this TV presenter character, and then also some of the sort of residents of the building that we meet as well?
They're kind of all unlikable. I'm going to say that it kind of fits within the type of character building that you just described. She's like hysterical most of the time, and also quite selfish. Like the fact that she basically tries to then start filming this and turn in, like, with the purposes of selling that to the network. I'm kind of taking advantage of a really panicky, dangerous situation where people are dying and suffering. And the way she speaks to her cameraman as well is quite aggressive, very insulting. Even at the point where, he, at the last 10 minutes when they're sort of in the dark and she's yelling at him, and he's trying to figure something out with the camera so he can turn on a light. She's quite shrill and unlikable. That's part of why I like her as well. It's like she's a vapid TV presenter.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I think she does it. She plays it really well. At the beginning, 100%. I kind of really like her at the beginning, and then she gets so unbelievably hysterical in the second half, which I guess you would, but at the same time it's jarring to be in her company throughout that whole time.
And I think that's absolutely fine, and the way that she reacts to the situations, especially at the beginning and at the end when she's panicking, they're so naturalistic. She's yelling not in a kind of scream queen way, she's yelling out of sheer terror. She's freaking out, she's sort of mangling her words, she's swearing a lot, she's kind of contorting her face. It's not about her looking perfect and pretty and kind of screaming. It's about her freaking the fuck out and wanting to get out of there in whatever means possible, which is kind of the survival instinct that kicks in. The other character that I really loved when I was rewatching was the mother. With the little daughter, who, has one brilliant moment where she is clearly been infected for a while and then she turns. But the mother constantly tries to like protect her daughter and keeps saying that, she's just got tonsillitis. She was sick. The dad went out to get some antibiotics for her. She's not had them. That's why she's pale. That's why she's got a fever, whatever. And very fiercely tries to protect her child. And then also eventually gets turned too. So I thought that dynamic was very beautiful. Also, she has some of the best, most like Spanish facial expressions and reactions. As I was watching her, I was like, oh my god, you are every single woman I've ever met.
That's really interesting. And she's that annoying. She's quite interfering, isn't she? There's moments when they want to just talk to the little girl and she stood at the side and she keeps interjecting and she can't like help herself this whole way through as well.
The other thing that's really interesting, which is a very kind of culturally specific thing, is that for like interesting but reasons I'm not going to go into, like there's a lot of neighbors are a big thing in kind of communities around a building are a very big thing in Spain, and there's usually like a caretaker figure that sort of lives in the building and takes care of all of the residents and the apartments and stuff, and there is a big kind of cultural thing of knowing your neighbors, of stopping and speaking with them on the stairs, that those public elements of a apartment block and a building are a huge community thing. So that kind of interference and kind of people nosing around, and when the really judgy older man who used to live with his mother until she passed away is kind of kind of criticizing the Chinese family who have their textile workshop in there, bitching about them. It's like, it's so classically real. Spanish and real. Everyone who's lived in Spain knows these people who will just comment on other people and criticize and gossip and things like that. And that's the same type of situation, but with added zombies.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and you're right. None of the characters are particularly likable to spend time with. And again, I wonder if this is not just a zombie thing, but it's a found footage thing too, I think. Me and Rosie talked about the Blair Witch Project, and I love the Blair Witch Project, but my God, those 3 characters are annoying as fuck to spend 90 minutes with, right? Heather as a character gets more and more shrill and annoying and just, crazed as it goes on, and so do the blokes as well. And again, I wonder if it's this thing of, having to portray humans as realistic as possible means that they are just quite flawed, awful, unlikable people.
Well, yeah, 100%.
It's the bleak
people
truth.
are not perfect.
Yeah. What do you think? What's your opinion on found footage in general? Do you like it?
I actually quite do.
Yeah.
I really enjoy them,
I do.
I particularly enjoy kind of seeing what the pretense is. Like,
yes.
What is the reason? Like, why is this footage found?
Yes.
Who was filming this footage?
Yeah.
Things like Blair Witch Project, great kind of basis for that footage to exist. Cloverfield as well. This as well. Like it works. It really, really if it works, it makes absolute sense. If it's really forced in a sense of like, I don't understand why somebody would go around filming all of this stuff.
Right.
Or the access that they're getting with this doesn't actually make narrative sense. It's a very tricky genre because it can very easily take you out of it when you see point blank that there is no actual logic behind this footage existing.
And it's the one, I'm not going to spoil Rec 2, but it's the one issue I had with Rec 2 where suddenly about half an hour into the movie, our footage stops and we cut to a whole new group of characters in a different location, and they're filming themselves on a mobile phone or whatever it is. And so it's like, I don't know, I was kind of like then thinking, well, what are we seeing then now? And also, who's editing this in the world of the film, And suddenly when you start thinking that it feels edited, that's when it falls apart, I think, because you are supposed to be seeing literally raw bits of footage, right? With that in no way have been tampered with or edited. So
well, technically, you could ask yourself who finds the footage in Rec.
Right. Very true.
Because the sequel totally picks up literally the second the first movie ends.
Yes.
So then we do get that explanation in the sequel. But we don't really in the first one.
No, that's very true. And that's the other thing, isn't it? Is that most of the time with found footage films, by their very nature, you can guarantee that everyone's going to die because... because usually the point of it is they find some footage, like no character's going to make it out alive kind of thing. But I like it as well. I think it's, like you say, it's easy to pick holes in. Do you find it annoying or jarring visually? The fact that most of the time with found footage, everything's a bit blurred, you don't see things very well, etc.
I mean, you could say the same thing about Game of Thrones, and that has
I have many thoughts on that Game of Thrones.
That's like a whole other episode. No, I don't find it jarring if it makes narrative sense.
Yeah, me too.
I really don't. And sometimes the not being able to see very clearly is also a source of terror.
Totally. I think I find the Blair Witch Project scary for that same reason. I know that you see fuck all when they're running through the pitch black woods screaming, but that's scary, right?
Yeah, I know if you've ever been running through pitch black woods, that's enough.
Exactly.
That really is enough.
Exactly. I think you know that's a bad situation they're in. Cool. And what about just in terms of the zombies themselves then as well? If we can even call these zombies, but I guess we can just for argument's sake. I mean, what do you think of them? Are you a fan of these kind of faster, more feral zombies in comparison to the classic Romero zombies and that kind of thing?
100%, because then they're scarier.
Oh, so much scarier.
Yeah. I'm particularly a fan of kid zombies.
Oh, yeah.
So when the little girl turns, I was like, oh, yeah, you're freaky as shit.
Oh, freaky shit. When she's just like stood in the flat and not moving for a while.
And they make a big deal out of their screams.
Yes.
So their zombies usually are quiet, even when they're fast.
Kind of groan. Yeah.
And here there's this added element of like they're screeching.
Yes.
Like they're very animalistic. They're just kind of like, they're not even, screeching for brains. They're just like trying to get at you, which is terrifying.
It really is. It's really scary. And I think it's paced quite well, this film as well, because there are moments of like quiet stillness. Like it happens with the very first lady they discover, the old woman who's just stood at the end of a corridor, and you just see her silhouetted. And it's the same with the little girl. There are moments when they just stand and watch before they suddenly pounce and shit hits the fan kind of thing.
And they're very unthreatening figures that are actually the most terrifying ones. So the little girl, the old woman, kind of these are all people who you don't necessarily see as physical threats.
It's true. It's not so much the cops and the firemen. And
exactly.
Yeah, that's true. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I think it all adds to that kind of like it's something that I feel like you don't get quite so much in a lot of zombie films, but it's the kind of uncanniness of it of this. Definitely.
And it's an extremely realistic.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Realistic zombie film. Like
It is realistic,
if a zombie outbreak in my apartment building happened, I imagine this is what it would look like.
100%. It's exactly what me and Lou just talked about with 28 Days Later as well. It felt like these two films together, they feel like, two examples of movies that are like, what if zombies but real? Like, what if this actually happened to you? You know, this is what would happen. Let's talk a little bit before we finish then in depth of that last section. So, like, what kind of happens when she gets up to the attic?
So they eventually, it's also kind of an interesting way of pacing the movie. They eventually kind of make their way up the building.
Yes.
And the last place where they need to hide is in the penthouse at the very top of the building. And they go into this room and they find, a typically cinematic, crazy ass psychotic room, basically.
It's so scary.
Bunch of like pictures taped to the wall, eyes scratched out of photos, weird shit spread out everywhere, like sort of chemistry sets and like weird things, an audio recorder of someone recording their own voice kind of like with what they were doing. So that's how they get a bit of backstory as to how the outbreak happened, which they trace back basically to a priest who had taken a supposedly possessed girl from Portugal to this apartment in Barcelona to experiment on her and use her blood to try to determine whether there's an enzyme that kind of hosts demonic possession in and of itself. So he's trying to kind of find the biological root of demonic possession. And that's the twist of Wreck, basically. And then supposedly that penthouse is empty. Turns out when the lights go out on their camera, which they were using to illuminate the room for themselves, they start seeing this sort of shadowy, emaciated figure wander around really slowly. And that turns out to be the actual possessed girl that is the origin of the virus.
Oh, God.
And, she's blind. She can't really see them. And she also, creepily enough, only appears in pitch black darkness. So that's her domain, and that adds a supernatural element to it as well. That sort of completely shifts the tone of the movie. And spoiler alert, they both get killed.
Oh my God.
That's not really true, but that's what Wreck tells us. That's how we end the story.
Yes.
With the cameraman being murdered by the Madeiras girl, which is how she's kind of presented in the narrative and in the franchise. And then Angela, who is the last girl standing, being dragged away into the darkness by presumably her.
Oh my God, yeah. What an ending.
I know,
Such a good ending. And again, I'm just going to keep shaming Rihanna through this, but she was so scared by the time we got to this last section that she just couldn't watch. And she just had her head turned to the side and was just looking at me, and she was like, you're just going to have to tell me what's happening because I cannot sit and watch this. I know, I was like, no, you need to watch it. But it's the moment when she's trying to be really, really quiet and you just see this woman kind of flailing around in the dark and knocking things over.
Who is played, by the way, by Javier Botet, who's a Spanish actor who you will have probably seen everywhere.
Yes. I know.
He's like a staple of genre cinema.
He plays a lot of like monsters and stuff.
Yeah, because he's very tall, extremely thin.
Yes,
he's a great actor. He's kind of like Spanish Doug Jones, if I dare say so.
Absolutely is.
And he always shows up in genre cinema. He played the kind of Mama in Mama.
Yes,
by,
that's right.
Andy Muschietti, who then went on to direct the 2 It films.
Right. Yeah, of course. Oh my God,
I did not know that. And he shows up a lot in. I don't think he's been in a Guillermo del Toro film, but you think he would have been. Yeah. He might have been, but no, he definitely shows up in a lot of horror films. So every time I see a kind of either Spanish or kind of low budget horror film, he's there.
Yes, there's a great film called. Oh, now what's it called? I've forgotten what it's called. It's got like an estate agent type name. Freehold.
Yes.
Have you seen Freehold?
Yes, I saw it at Fright Fest a couple of years ago.
He's the guy who lives
He's the main guy.
Yeah. Creepy.
Yeah, he's excellent at that.
Really good. He's kind of creepy, but also sympathetic. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
I thought that film was quite good.
He's a really, really gifted kind of physical actor.
Yes.
He uses his body really well.
Exactly.
And kind of disappears into these, fantastical characters.
100%. Yeah. It's a really stunning last scene. And, I think this film has, obviously the Blair Witch has influenced so much and influenced this, I'm sure, but this has also influenced, I think, a lot of found footagey films that 100%. Came after it. And even Blair Witch, as in the Adam Wingard 2016, I think it was, Blair Witch sequel, which I wasn't a big fan of, but there is a final sequence in which you kind of see the Blair Witch through night vision flailing around in the background behind the main character. I was like, oh, well, this is just Wreck. I mean, it's straight out of Wreck, it felt like, the final act. It's I think it's, this movie's sparked a lot and it's influenced a lot, hasn't it?
Hi, I'm Angela Vidal. We're in Los Angeles, traveling along with the fire department.
It's not so bad.
These are the men you'll be shadowing tonight. Wherever they go, you go too.
Police are here. It might be a little more serious than we thought.
A woman was screaming bloody murder back there.
Fire department's about to begin the rescue process. Police say that she lives alone. She's not very social.
Okay. We're gonna get you some medical help, okay?
Have you seen the remake, Quarantine?
I haven't actually,
Neither
no.
have I. Neither have I. Well,
to be honest, not too interested.
No, I think it's, from what I've heard from other people, a few people have tweeted about it and they said it's fine. It's like not a bad remake. It's solid. It's exactly the same, but with American actors, basically. So I don't really feel the need to watch it.
Yeah, me either, to be honest. It's like, part of the appeal as well for me is seeing that kind of set in Barcelona and people speaking in very naturalistic Spanish.
Yeah, no, totally.
And also, Spanish cinema has a hugely rich history with genre. And Rec was one of the kind of sparks of reigniting kind of a new, I hesitate to call it a wave, but definitely kind of a few key new talents in Spanish genre cinema, including Paco Plaza, including Jaume Balagueró. This was their big success that then enabled them to continue making films. And they both have pretty much like strictly operated within the genre world.
Yeah, well, that's great. And actually 2007, the same year that we got The Orphanage as well, which is absolutely one of the scariest films also that I've ever seen.
Or maybe there was a new Spanish horror wave.
Yeah, God. I do think Spanish I think they do horror well, actually.
They do horror really well. There's a huge tradition of horror in Spain.
Yeah, and a very good, particularly, not so much with Rec, but these kind of like quite melancholic ghost movies and things like that. La Residencia as well, and some of those older ones from the 70s. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Amazing. Anything else you want to mention on Rec? Anything else we've missed?
No, I don't think we've missed anything. I definitely would encourage people to discover the work of Paco Plaza and Jaume Balagueró because they've done some very interesting stuff.
And just generally speaking, I know you spoke briefly about the sequels. Do you like them? I mean, do you have any favourites or any notes on sort of generally parts 2, 3 and 4 in this series?
I really like Rec 2.
Yeah.
I must admit I've only seen Rec 3 and Rec 4 once.
Yeah.
They're distinctly different from the first two.
Yeah.
Rec 3 kind of even abandons the found footage pretense very early on and kind of shifts to kind of normal third person cinematic viewing. But I think it's really interesting in the way that it relates to the first two because it's both a sequel and a prequel and a parallel.
Yes,
quel.
It's kind of happening at the same time or something, right? I think I've read this.
Slightly before.
Okay.
It's really interesting, like the way they've structured the universe. I think it's very interesting.
Interesting. Okay. Oh, I will have to check them out at some point, definitely. Amazing. Anna, thank you so much for joining me. This has been so much fun. Finally, if it's not Rec, what's your favourite zombie movie?
Oh God. Well, now you're putting me on the spot.
I know. And there's like thousands to choose
There's too many.
So you've got your classic Romero.
Literally coming back, like Dawn of the Dead I really like. Oh my God, okay, no. I'm going to go with a weird one.
Oh,
I'm going to go with Night of the Living Dead 3, which is the one where, and I forget her name now, the woman who played one of the mothers in the OC with red hair.
Yeah, good. Of course.
So it's basically like a zombie Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, wait. You mean Return of the Living Dead 3?
Yes,
Return of the Living Dead.
Return of the Living Dead 3, yes. So the ripoff of Night of the Living Dead. Yeah, that's kind of parallel franchise.
Yes.
So the third one, I watched way too young, but I remember it stuck with me because it had this like basically zombie romance at the center where the girl who gets turned first is trying very hard to not eat her boyfriend.
Really? Right, do you know what? Weirdly, I had never even heard of this film and you are now the third guest this season to say that is their favourite
was one of the Michael Blythe.
So I'm no, it wasn't Michael Blythe, funnily enough. No, it wasn't.
No, because I only mentioned Michael because he, bless him, he and his dark mind, he screened it a few years ago at the BFI and I thought it was such an amazing experience to rewatch that film on the big screen.
Oh, yeah.
Because I've only seen it on crappy VHS copies.
Yes.
And, it's not a great film. I just find it an interesting take on a zombie movie because, she's fully articulate. Like, she's a human and she's trying very hard to contain her impulses.
Yes.
And she does that as well by kind of hurting herself as well.
Right.
Which then creates a sort of like really weird neo-industrial Tetsuo-esque zombie hot girl.
It's kind of body horror type thing as well. Yeah, it's really interesting. We talked about the first Return of the Living Dead, obviously, and this weird, it gave you a kind of a different insight into sort of what it is to be a human and become a zombie, and a focus on like the sort of the pain and that kind of thing that a lot of zombie films don't. So yeah, it sounds interesting. I have not watched either sequel, so I will definitely check that one out. Very cool. Anna, thank you so much. Where can people find you out there in the world, on the internet, etc.?
I am on Twitter on Anna B Demented, and I'm also one of the co-founders of The Final Girls, and we've just launched a new platform for female-led writing on horror cinema called Bloody Women.
Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think I told you about this.
You haven't told me about this.
Sorry,
this is awesome. Cool.
So, exclusive for you.
Yes.
Sort of. Well, no. I don't know.
Not really.
But anyway, so we're open for pitches and stuff like that. So people can get in touch with us through our website on thefinalgirls.co.uk.
Oh my God. I'm sure, I've no doubt you'll be inundated probably. That's amazing.
Hopefully,
That's
we've got
really
an amazing woman as well doing the commissioning for us, which we're really excited about.
Awesome. And what about any other Final Girl events? Anything happening at the moment? Or
so we're
nothing
working really hard on a slightly bigger project on witches that will come later on in the year.
Amazing. Perfect. Anna, thank you so much. And that's it for this week. Thank you very much for listening, and a big thank you to my two brilliant guests, two of the BFI's finest, Lou Thomas and Anna Bogutskaya. So, what do you think of this week's movies? 28 Days Later and Wreck, I would argue, in a subgenre that is not particularly known for scares. These are the two scariest and most traumatic, most frightening, and possibly two of the most well-directed zombie movies ever made. Do you agree with me? Or disagree? Get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Letterboxd. If you check us out on Letterboxd, you can find out the last few movies we're going to be discussing in this series on zombies. Simply go to letterboxd.com/evolutionpod. Don't forget, you can find all episodes of this podcast and all other seasons on our website. Simply go to evolutionofhorror.com. You can also find a blog section on there, and you can find our brand new merchandise page in which we are selling Evolution of Horror t-shirts. Now, these have been selling like hotcakes, particularly some of the limited edition designs that were designed by Mike Lee Graham. There's actually only a handful of those left, so if you don't want to miss out, I would get involved if I were you. Get on that website, evolutionofhorror.com/shop, and pick yours up ASAP. And don't forget, if you're a patron, you'll get a discount on those t-shirts, a 15% discount. If you want to become a patron of the Evolution of Horror, simply go to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. Donate $5 a month. You will then also get access to our Game of Thrones episode from this week with Jacob Stolworthy and a whole bunch of other bonus episodes. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, Acast, Podbean, and various others. If you get a chance, please do subscribe to us. Please do rate and review us, preferably with something nice and complimentary and positive. It's nice to read, but it also gets us boosted in algorithms and helps us get discovered by new listeners. So please do spread the love. Okay, well, speaking of love, next week things are going to get a little bit romantic as we discuss one of the most famous rom-zom-coms. That's right, next week I'm going to be joined by Rhianna Dillon, and we will be discussing Edgar Wright's Shaun of the Dead from 2004. And not only that, we're also going to pair it with another iconic zombie comedy from a few years ago. Alongside Shaun of the Dead, we will also be discussing Zombieland. It's going to be a really, really fun episode. Cannot wait for you to hear it. So join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.